Well, good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to be with you. I'm Dan LOHRMANN. I'm the CISO, field CISO with Presidio, and it's great to be with you. Just a little bit of background about myself. I'm from Michigan. It's wonderful to be in Montreal. It's my first time in Montreal, and it's wonderful to be here. Wonderful organization. Thank you to Alexa. Thank you to the whole team, Vincent, for the invitation. We have an incredible panel to talk to you this morning. About this. My background briefly, I was at the National Security Agency in Washington. I was at NSA in the late 80s. I was in England with Lockheed and Mantech in the 90s, and then 17 years in Michigan government. So I was the chief security officer in Michigan, and had a lot of different roles, CSO, CTO, CISO in Michigan, and now I'm with Presidio. It's great to be with you all. And this topic, we're going to bring our panelists up in a second, but I just want to say that this topic really, for me, goes back to 2005. And in 2005, we had a critical infrastructure conference in Michigan shortly after 9/11. We had been planning different things around that. And then really, it's accelerated each year until the events that happened on May 7th, 2021. And that was the day the Colonial Pipeline was hit in the United States. And it kind of woke the United States up to this topic, Canada as well, different parts of the world, when gas lines formed in the East Coast, and people started saying, this is real. Cybersecurity can actually lead to physical results and challenges that we face. And then really, we're going to talk about the numbers, but in 2022, attacks against critical infrastructure were up 140% last year. 150 incidents, major incidents against our supply chain. And then just literally this week, we had 5 hospitals hit this week in Ontario, and all but emergency operations were canceled, and that's ongoing as we speak. So this is a little intro into this topic. I'd like to invite the panelists to come join us right now. Come on up to the stage, and I want to introduce each of them, let them tell you about their background, because it's an amazing panel of world-class experts. We'll let them tell you about themselves and what their involvement in this topic, and then we're going to dive into some questions. I want to mention again that for the last 15 minutes, we will take questions from the audience. So we want to hear your questions. Please, you come up to the microphone at the end. We're going to give you an opportunity to do that. I want to start off with immediately to my left is Leah McGrath. Leah is the Executive Director of StateRAMP. And Leah, tell us about your role and what you do each day.
Absolutely. Well, a little bit of my background prior to working as the Executive Director of StateRAMP. I've worked in state and local government for over 20 years. Prior to joining StateRAMP, I served as the Deputy Mayor for our city. And our city, when you think about critical infrastructure, we managed water utility, wastewater treatment plant, a sewer utility. I also served as the Deputy Mayor of our city on our local energy utility board. And so when we were thinking about critical infrastructure and really the importance of protecting not only our citizen data, but also our citizens' way of life, cybersecurity plays a really big role in those conversations. And so it was through my experiences with the state and local government, really trying to also modernize the way that we were doing business and the way that we were delivering our services to our to our citizens, that I found myself at this intersection of really trying to figure out and help our community figure out how do we modernize in a way that is still ensuring the level of security that was important to provide. And it was through those efforts that I became connected with really the founders, including Dan LOHRMANN here, of StateRAMP. And so StateRAMP was founded in 2020. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about what StateRAMP is later, but really is very focused on best practices and validating the security posture for the cloud products that are used by states, local governments across the U.S. to ensure that security standards are being met.
Thank you so much, Leah. To my left is Nancy RAINOSEK.
Good morning. I'm Nancy RAINOSEK. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Texas. Prior to that, I was Enterprise Security Manager and Deputy CISO at our Health and Human Services Agency, which is 55,000 employees. It was combined 5 agencies, and when I got there, we found out there wasn't even a firewall protecting this enterprise. So that became my mission, was to provide some border protection with that agency. After that, I went to the Department of Information Resources. We're the IT provider for the state. We do all the contracting. All state agencies have to purchase from our contracts for technology unless it hits a certain threshold, and then they have to go out for bid. We operate the state network. We're the internet service provider. We have 2.5 million IPs, live IPs, beyond our border. So we do the blocking and tackling at the border. Texas is federated, so much like the country, the United States, we're federated where every department has their own IT shop, their own information security officer. So we set policy for those agencies, and then we provide them support services, training, pen tests, assessments, and we have some statewide committees that we confer with as we're doing that. And now we're kind of delving into local government, which again, in the federated state of Texas, local control is very important. So it's an exciting job. I really enjoy it, and thank you all for having me here today. I appreciate it.
So Nancy, before we jump to the next one, I just want to mention, you were telling us last night how big Texas is. Just tell us like from the bottom of Texas to the top, how does that compare to like the distance to Canada? I mean,
okay, so if you start at the very bottom of Texas and drive, and you're driving to Canada, by the time you get to the top of the Panhandle, you're over halfway to Canada.
So I thought that was interesting. Big state. So Daniel COUILLARD is the Director General of Partnerships and Risk Mitigation for the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. Daniel.
OK. Merci, Dan. So, je veux te féliciter pour avoir prononcé mon nom d'une manière fantastique. Alors, bravo. OK. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for InCyber for doing this, inviting us here. Dan COUILLARD, I'm the DG of Partnership and Risk Mitigation, which is a fancy way to say my focus at the Cyber Center is working on cyber resilience for federal government and critical infrastructure. Since the Cyber Center is fairly new, 5 years in, and historically we grew from a group that was focused on protecting the federal government infrastructure, but since then we have now focused, we receive a national mandate, and we're now actively engaging critical infrastructure in Canada to obviously raise the cyber resilience, bring the message about the threat they're facing, help them understand where they should invest in their cyber resilience, and that's what we're doing. So my background is just some small guy from Quebec City that wanted to see the world, joined the military, did that for 20+ years, learned English out of that, and after 9/11, initially I did play cowboy and Indian in the military, but second part, started dabbling into communication security, ComSec, and cybersecurity. 9/11 came in, and then it was an opportunity to switch to our national cybersecurity agency in Canada. So that's how I got here today. So, très heureux d'être ici, and welcome the upcoming conversation there. Merci.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And last but certainly not least, we have Steve GAUTHIER, the General Director for Center for Government Cybersecurity in Quebec. Steve, welcome.
Merci, Dan. Bien prononcé, you pronounce GAUTHIER perfectly. Steve GAUTHIER, donc directeur général du Centre gouvernemental de cyberdéfense au ministère de la Cybersécurité du numérique. J'ai été une douzaine d'années au privé, technologie de l'information, développement informatique, tout ça. Depuis 2011, moi, je suis au gouvernement du Québec, tout récemment depuis la création du ministère de la Cybersécurité du numérique au Centre gouvernemental de cyberdéfense. Le centre gouvernemental est une unité administrative qui offre des services à l'ensemble de l'administration publique. Donc, on a une mission qui est très particulière et qui est unique au gouvernement. On supporte l'ensemble de l'administration publique, ça veut dire plus de 300 organismes publics. Concrètement, ce qu'on fait, c'est qu'on établit des bonnes pratiques à mettre en place, des obligations, une offre de formation aussi pour augmenter le niveau de sécurité dans l'administration publique. On a aussi des services qui sont plus opérationnels, tests d'intrusion, balayage de vulnérabilité. On a lancé la plateforme de signalement des vulnérabilités en 2021, que probablement plusieurs connaissent. Sinon, programme de Primo-Bug qui a été lancé en mai 2022 et qui va permettre d'avoir l'ensemble des actifs de l'administration publique là, exposés à Internet dans ce programme-là d'ici fin 2026. Merci.
So Steve, I'd like to start with you. If you could just start off from your perspective, what are the major cyber threats around critical infrastructure that your organization sees every day, every week?
Comme je disais, la mission du ministère de la Cybersécurité et du numérique couvre l'ensemble de l'administration publique, donc en partie, que ce soit dans certains cas des infrastructures critiques ou les infrastructures tout simplement là, numériques du gouvernement du Québec. Je dirais que les principales menaces qu'on voit, c'est notre capacité à répondre à toutes sortes d'attaques qu'il peut y avoir. Ce qu'on observe encore beaucoup, c'est la capacité des gens, des employés, à détecter, par exemple, des courriels d'hameçonnage, l'ingénierie sociale, qu'on appelle piratage psychologique au Québec. C'est la capacité aussi de nos organisations, quand je disais plus de 300, à bien gérer les vulnérabilités, donc appliquer les correctifs de sécurité le plus rapidement possible pour éviter qu'ils soient exploités. Donc, c'est des choses qui sont toujours de base, toujours d'actualité, mais c'est important autant sur le plan humain que nos gens détectent bien que sur le plan de nos infrastructures, on met les correctifs de sécurité à jour et qu'on gère bien notre désuétude pour éviter différentes attaques.
Dan, same question to you. I mean, when you think about critical infrastructure, how does that impact your organization? Yes, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. So let me start at the macro level and just mention that every 2 years, the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, the Cyber Center, we do publish a national cyber threat assessment, which is basically based on all the classified and open source information that Canada has access to kind of put out a statement of where we stand against the threat in Canada. Our current one was published we always publish this in October during Cybersecurity months. And it was published a year ago, so it's halfway through it's 2 years looking forward. And there's always 5 judgments that we're kind of summarized that we feel Canadians should be concerned with. And one of those judgments is clearly stated is about the fact that critical infrastructure are threatened by cyber actors. So it should be, so really in that document, that statement is there so that CISO can take this to their board and understand and brief this to their leaders that, hey, this is a real threat that we need to face now. So more specifically, though, I would say if we all see what the geopolitics of what's happening in the world in the last couple of years, if we were to write this assessment today, a year in, we would use a stronger language. We would use a language that would be even more serious, try to promote the fact and the risk and the threat created to critical infrastructure by the cyber threat. And specifically to that point, earlier this spring, we did publish, so the Cyber Center does publish a lot of alert and flashes or bulletin, threat bulletin, or different type of document that are reacting to different situation. But in the spring, we did put out a cyber threat bulletin, basically letting know critical infrastructure that we are seeing state actor going beyond focusing on spying activity and establishing a presence or in our infrastructure, but we're seeing sign now that they're doing this with a view to do sabotage. They're doing this with a view to actually create physical harm to infrastructure to generate physical issue in the real world. So, I mean, we have never seen any direct threat to Canada at this point in time, but we do see signs internationally into like-minded nation like Canada where those state actors are doing those activity. And that for us is a critical piece of information that we take now forward, and we try to make sure that critical infrastructure operator, and of course the big one, understand they need to invest, but it's everybody needs to be invested in this. And my little catchphrase, and I'm just actually quoting somebody that said this, and that's what we're trying to say to critical infrastructure operator is maybe you don't care about geopolitics, but geopolitics does care about you. So you need to invest, and you need to be ready for this.
Voilà. Great. Thank you for that. Excellent. Nancy, when you think about Texas, your role in Texas as the Chief Security Officer in Texas, how do you think about critical infrastructure as a whole? Attacks.
Yeah, so we have committees that we're working with now, and we try to include somebody from every sector every critical infrastructure sector. So we meet monthly. We have banking, we have oil and gas, we have medical, across the board. And it's very important to us as we work towards protecting critical infrastructure. It's interesting that most of the critical infrastructure is privately held. So my office, it has to operate on influence and not regulation from that regard. And so we look to the federal government to help in that regard, but it's mainly an influential job.
So when I went back to that, I know you've had some ransomware attacks in Texas. Tell us about that, and how does that play into attacks against governments in Texas?
So in 2019, we had a ransomware event. I always joke that when my deputy would call me on a Thursday or Friday, it was going to be a bad weekend. It started with one sheriff's office in some small county, and then it grew to 8, and then it grew to 12, and eventually it hit a SCADA system for a water provider for a city. Eventually it was 23 local governments that were impacted by this ransomware. I was kind of freaking out, like, is it time for me to put in my resignation or what? So, but we had developed a plan. We had developed partnerships with a number of organizations. The governor declared a disaster. We had put that in place to give him the ability to declare a disaster in event of a cyber event. And we had practiced this plan. And it was interesting, my focus until 2019 was mainly state government and universities, institutions of higher education. In 2019, cities, counties, they started calling us, help, we need help. And so we were prepared. We were able to remediate all 23 and have them up and operational in 7 days. And that took a lot of effort because it was in North Texas, it was in South Texas, it was in East Texas, it was in West Texas. The 23 were spread geographically across the state, and just getting people to these were difficult. It took 8, 10, and 12 hours to drive to these places to have people on the ground. But it's important to realize that they're going after water, and a lot of those water districts aren't cyber smart, and so we've made that a goal to really focus on water and power, in particular for protecting our citizens.
Great, thank you for that. So Leah, Nancy mentioned a number of words there around partnership, public-private, working together. I know State Ramp works with cloud providers. You work with protecting sensitive data across many sectors, especially in government. Tell us about the role of State Ramp and how that plays into this wider topic.
Oh, I mean, when you think about critical infrastructure, it's probably the most pressing why you need to be thinking about collaboration and partnerships, and where State Ramp fits in most significantly. And so State Ramp is a nonprofit. We're a member-driven organization, and we have members who represent, as you said, states, local governments, higher ed, K-12 schools, water districts. We're seeing real interest in some of those kind of quasi-private or utility, energy utilities as well. And they come into State Ramp and join with private sector companies and technology companies. We've got over 260 technology companies who are members of State Ramp right now. And the idea is that by coming together and working with thought leaders and really great partners in the federal government as well. We work with the Critical Infrastructure and Security Agency. We work with FBI, their Criminal Justice Information Systems, the Executive Office on Cybersecurity, when they came out with their national strategy for cybersecurity. How do we take that and how do we help bring that to the local level where the consequences can be like really felt. So StateRAMP as a nonprofit brings all these partners together to develop best practices for cloud security, to identify standards that are common, that can be recognized, and then we've got a security verification program, in essence, so that providers, the benefit for the provider community is they're able to come through our program to have assessments, whether they're kind of early in their cyber journey or all the way ready for full authorization, which is our highest level of certification, and allow them to be able to validate and verify their cyber posture in one place, as opposed to going through 50 different state assessments or more if you consider the number of local jurisdictions across the US. So that's really the benefit for the provider community is to be able to come in, raise the bar, and validate and verify. But most importantly, probably the cornerstone or foundation is the information sharing. And that's so critical when we think about how we become better partners and better stewards of our critical infrastructure is through that information sharing. So the private sector, so the providers have the ability through our program to provision access to kind of high-level executive summary details of their security posture. There's monthly reporting. We also have triggers in place, so if there are threats through the supply chain, if there are, you think about the Move It, right, file transfer that affected so many states and local jurisdictions across the country and worldwide, but if there are threats in their supply chain, or if there are high vulnerabilities, it's about sharing that information quickly and proactively so that states, local governments, others who are depending on that technology have insights into the strengths and risks upfront so they can take action if needed. So it's a framework, it's a program that facilitates best practices and standards, but probably more importantly, that information sharing.
Great, thank you. So we're going to go to questions in the audience in about 5 minutes. I'd like to go down, just ask Steve, then Dan, then Nancy. When you think about this topic, and we could list tons of stories all over the world of critical infrastructures that are being attacked right now. Supply chain is being hit. The stories are, literally just talking with Dan earlier, they're daily, But when you think about the next 12 months, what projects or what things are you doing in your organization, your government, that can help solve this problem? So what are some solutions, what projects, what programs are you working on over the next year, let's say, 12 months, to help address the cyber attacks that are coming against critical infrastructure? Let's start with Steve.
Dans les prochains mois, on va poursuivre ce qu'on a déjà entamé, là, je dirais, depuis, on est à notre 2e année, on a un programme de rehaussement de la cybersécurité. Il y a un 170 millions qui a été réservé pour l'ensemble de l'administration publique pour qu'ils puissent nous proposer des initiatives qui vont permettre de rehausser leur niveau de cybersécurité. Donc, ça rejoint autant les infrastructures critiques que le reste des infrastructures gouvernementales. Sinon, je vous dirais, le prochain programme qui s'en vient, qui va être intéressant aussi, qui va permettre de rehausser notre niveau de sécurité, c'est une stratégie qui, encore là, qui, elle, est en élaboration. Par contre, vous allez pouvoir avoir, s'il y en a qui sont intéressés, là, avoir plus de détails. On consulte même la population au kiosque du gouvernement du Québec. Ma collègue Kim Laveau va être là pendant toute la durée de l'événement et plus particulièrement demain, 10h30. C'est une stratégie là, qui va s'adresser à l'ensemble du gouvernement. Le ministère le disait ce matin, la portée de notre mission, elle est, oui, je dirais principalement, dépendamment des secteurs de l'organisation, elle concerne l'administration publique seulement, mais on a aussi d'autres secteurs du ministère qui, eux, leur mission couvre les infrastructures critiques, la population. Donc, cette stratégie-là qui est en élaboration va permettre d'amener des mesures pour rehausser la cybersécurité, autant au niveau de l'administration publique que les infrastructures critiques, et qui va amener du soutien aussi à la population, aux citoyens, aux entreprises.
Okay. So, I mean, that's a difficult question there because it's a
I know that.
super wide topic. So, and we have engagement on many fronts, but I guess I'm gonna present it in a way that how we see our mission at the Cyber Center. So our mission at the Cyber Center is really to protect, inform, and empower. So I'm going to give you an example along those 3 axes. So protect. So we have active program now where we are partnering with critical infrastructure operator to help them protect their network. So, so basically, it's a model where we have some technology, we have some threat knowledge, we do exchange information from their network, network flow, and those type of topics. I'm not going to name the group, but a couple of things are public. The Canadian Gas Association has a program called Blue Flame, so we're heavily involved in that. The Independent Electric System Operator of Ontario also have a similar program. We're quite involved in that. And obviously, and then we have other bilateral programs with specific large operator. So we're definitely focused on that and try to exchange and really grab their information, apply our knowledge to that information and let them know. And really we're focusing on state threat, obviously nation state threat to those infrastructure. So that's on the protect. On the inform, well, clearly we are producing more and more now publication, advice and guidance to help tailor to the critical infrastructure sector. One of the areas where we're going to be more active over the next year is two things, is security control profile that tailored to sector, like gas or water or those type of sectors. So, and those profiles will be aligned with the U.S. So I just want to make that to that. So because so much of those critical infrastructure are actually operating on both sides of the border, so we need to have common goal, and this is where we work with CISA, our U.S. Sister agency, to really define those and make sure Canada and U.S. goes at it in an end-to-end together to make this happen. So really active there in Empower. We're also doing tailored threat assessment to sector again, so they understand. And those are, like I mentioned, are meant to board so that CISO can get these people to understand the threat they're facing and be informed to make those proper investments. And finally, in the Empower space, lots of sectors are organized to the information sharing comment made by Leah. It's so important that we know each other prior that there's an actual crisis, and that's where those forums comes to play. Some sectors are really well organized, some other not so much because of the different nature of the sector. So this is where we invest time and resources to create those community, foster those community, and bring people around the table and go beyond the fact that they are business competitor, but make it clear to them that in the cyberspace they need to be ally. Even if they're not business-wise, they're competing for the same client. So that's our focus. We do a bunch of other things, but clearly those are the axes we try to work on right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Nancy.
I can talk about one program that we've stood up as a result of that 2019 ransomware event. We are establishing regional security operations centers in partnership with universities. So we stood the first one up last year with Angelo State University. So they're empowered to provide cybersecurity services for critical infrastructure for cities, counties, school districts in their area, and we're funding it. With that, in addition to the protection that they need, and I'll tell you, we've had 161 ransomware incidents across Texas that we are aware of, and they don't have to report to me, so that number is probably low, where I would say 90% are local jurisdictions. So there's a real problem out there because they don't have the talent, they don't have the funding, and so we're trying to push this to eventually have 12 of these across Texas. And in addition to protecting the local sectors, we're training students. So they not only get training, real life experience in being part of a SOC, they're also getting that feel for public service because a lot of these students can make a lot of money going to the private sector. So it's hoping to instill passion in them as well for working for the public sector. One other thing that we're doing, and we developed a training class for law enforcement officers because a lot of times the first call a company might make, a small business, a water district, whoever would be to law enforcement, and they're not necessarily equipped to deal with that. So we've developed a training course where they get the kind of credits that they need to keep their jobs. And in 2 months, we've had over 600 law enforcement officers in Texas go through this training class. We're now working on one for water. and then we'll move to power. And so we're really trying to focus on these areas and bring training to the people that are responsible for operating critical infrastructure.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nancy. Please come on up. If you have a question, come up to the microphone. We're going to take maybe 10 minutes of questions, please. If you could just come up and line up. Just want to mention, before we take that first question, you mentioned some sessions tomorrow. Go ahead, come on up so you'll be ready. There are 2 sessions. There's one on Smart Cities, Smart 830. If you want to join us upstairs, closed-door discussion around what's being done to protect smart cities, smart transportation. As we start thinking about autonomous vehicles, we start talking about a lot of other things. That's going to be a session at 8:30 in the morning, and then also Cyber May Day and the day after, a session on my book, talking about true ransomware stories and what happened behind the scenes with CEOs. So you're welcome to that at 1 o'clock. Please, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hi, I'm Raman with KPMG.
Yes.
It is hard to overstate the importance of electricity for any nation. Any significant disruption of electricity or water directly impacts the national security, public safety, and the economy.
Yep.
If it is an attack on these critical infrastructure by a nation state, would it be considered an act of war?
Yeah, I'm going to throw that to Dan first. I think the simple answer is a good lawyer answer. It depends, right? But I'm going to say, Dan, go ahead, take it away.
It depends. Very good question. I mean, that's a $64,000 question or $1 million question. That's the, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, to be honest, unless somebody from Global Affairs Canada is here, wants the mic, I'll give it to them for sure. But what I want to say, though, that's the challenge we're facing now. There's a gray zone in the cybersecurity domain where acts that are not tolerated in the physical world are tolerated. And I think, to me, what's new now is, as I mentioned, we see now instead of nation state deploying malicious code that's created to do damage. You know, so we're getting closer to have to answer that question about what happened when some malicious activity is happening in the cyber world. We're getting closer to the point where governments are going to have to answer that question and act accordingly. So this is where we are. Still a lot of debate around how you get there and how you do that. In the time where it's only dollar or privacy, I think government have a bit more runway, I would say, to discuss. When life and serious nationwide breakout are happening, and those can happen, right? We saw in Canada, nothing to do with cyber. But we all know the Roger incident where Rogers went out for one day, and the poor Interact people lost for one day. There was no Interact service in Canada. So it was InCyber. So, but the point is, those are real. Those can happen, and we're going to have to answer those questions because there's interdependency that are massive, especially like electricity, energy, ICT, and transport. Those are massive critical infrastructure that have rippling effect throughout the country if there's a problem with them.
I'm not sure if Steve wants to respond or not to that, but I just wanted to add one other thing. You know, with NATO countries and the war in Ukraine, there's been a lot of discussion around what would trigger a NATO response. There certainly have been quite a few CISA publications on this very topic about where is that demarc line. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a political decision at the highest levels of government, both in Canada, the United States, other countries, and NATO countries. The question of what triggers, you know, a NATO response, what triggers a military response, is something that is actively being debated. I think they want to be gray about the answer. That being said, the whole move of what's happened with cyber and NATO is something to really take a look at, and there's quite a bit about this at the CISA website in the U.S. If you go to CISA.gov, a lot about what the responses could be given different types of attacks. There's also been quite a few people who believe that test runs have already happened or are happening now to say, what if, God forbid, China went to Taiwan or something like that happened, what would there be attacks against like U.S. critical infrastructure, Canadian critical infrastructure, that kind of a thing? So
can I just add something? Sorry, quickly. Government do something, and I want to just mention that governments, especially like Five Eyes in NATO country, we are conducting foreign cyber operation against the bad guys. Again, a lot of that material is classified, but if you go see our annual report, there's actually a couple of pages on that of what we're willing to publicly admit. But basically, in our legislation, we have authority to conduct foreign cyber operation against cyber criminals outside of Canada that are creating a threat to Canada in peacetime. So what's public is the authorization we get. Doesn't mean we're actually doing an activity or an operation, but we can do it. And those are the capability we now government are accepting to create so that we can target those kind of, prevent those scenarios reaching that catastrophic level. Our US colleagues are way more public about us. I mean, if you remember the Colonial Pipeline?
Yes.
The US government, so it happens, but they paid the ransomware, or they paid the fee, but the US government actually went back to steal the money back from the bad guys, if you remember the story there. So that was kind of one of those operations where the government say enough, and they paid to get the system back up and running, but they actually went back and then recuperated a lot of those Bitcoin back to the US government. So,
thank you.
So we're doing things.
Steve, did you want to comment at all or not on that? Okay, you're good? Oh.
Non, je pense que Dan a bien résumé la situation. C'est des beaux défis.
Got it. Thanks. Is there anyone else? One more question. We have maybe time for one more before we do final comments from the panelists. So we have final question. Go ahead.
Hi, Rob Hughes from RSA. I was curious with such very independent states of Texas and Quebec on stage, how do you feel about the interoperation between state and federal governments as it comes to cybersecurity, where you're dealing with some of these nation-state threats and attacks?
Yeah, great question. So Nancy, why don't you start with that? Go ahead.
So we partner with the federal government a lot. When we had our 2019 ransomware event, the FBI was there with us in the State Operations Center. CISA was with us. And actually, we were able to catch some machines that were simply disconnected from the internet and not turned off. So they were able to indict and eventually extradite one of the culprits and bring them to justice in the United States. So that's something that we're really proud of, is our partnership with them.
Great. Steve, you want to answer?
Can you repeat louder, please?
Sure. I was asking about the cooperation between federal and state governments. So with Quebec in relation to the Canadian federal government, how do you feel about the cooperation there, or is there anything you'd like to see improve, I guess?
We're having lunch together.
That's good. That's a start.
Ça fait quand même plusieurs années qu'on a une entente de partenariat là, dont Dan fait partie là, avec le Centre de sécurité des télécommunications au Canada. Donc oui, une bonne collaboration, un partage de renseignements, un partage aussi d'expertise. On s'en va aussi vers du partage de code. Donc une très, très bonne collaboration entre les deux niveaux là, d'administration publique.
Okay, so we're about 3 or 4 minutes left. What I'd like to do now is just go down, start with Leah. We're going to go down and give each panelist 1 minute, just 1 minute, because we got to end here at 25 after. What's one gold nugget, what takeaway that you would have everyone in the audience thinks about this panel 1 week from now? What's maybe one thing you'd like them to remember, or could we repeat something you already said or something new? Leah.
You know, one thing I've been thinking is that we're talking about these cyber attacks, these risks, critical infrastructure, and if you look at the data, if it's not half, it may be even a majority of these attacks are coming through supply chain. They're coming through the suppliers, your suppliers, or underlying technologies that are being used, especially if we look at government. And so I think if there was one thing, it's knowing that in order to really protect our way of life, to protect what we do, it is going to require partnership. It is going to require everyone coming to the table and being kind of part of the cyber defense team together. And so that would be my takeaway. And it's been an honor to be here. I appreciate your time and to be a part of State Ramp as well.
Nancy.
Are y'all familiar with the TV show Ted Lasso? one of his many sayings, and he's really famous for this, is, when I see impossible, I think I'm possible. And that's how I approach my job. It's a big job. I joke that I've put on 40 pounds since I took this job because I stress eat a lot. But, you know, I would have never imagined 20 years ago that I'd be in the position I'm in today. And I really have the opportunity to make a difference. And everyone in this room has an opportunity to make a difference in what's going on right now with cyber. And so we all need to work together to make that happen.
Thank you, Nancy. Dan?
Okay, it'll be two things, quick. Number one, I would say collaboration and information sharing. I mean, that's underpinning everything we do. I mean, cybersecurity is a big, big, big technology component, but at the end of the day, it's people making the solution and actually going through crisis and making sure we're resilient. So we need to invest in that and believe in that, so that's one. Number two, not directly related to CI protection, but I think fundamental to our success. I just want to make a statement about diversity. We do invest a lot at CSC, or the Cyber Center, in making sure we have a diverse workforce. So I think that's also critical. I mean, let's be honest. The IT world is dominated by one gender typically, and they have white hairs. So not on this panel, so this is great. But what we need to do, though, is invest more and making sure we create the condition that we attract all those that can contribute. So I think it's also essential that we invest globally into that perspective.
Thank you,
Voilà.
Dan. Steve?
Collaboration est super importante. On a besoin de beaucoup de gens pour continuer à défendre nos infrastructures critiques, nos actifs informationnels, et on ne peut pas le faire individuellement, chacun de notre côté. On le voit de notre côté, notre mission elle est centrale au niveau du gouvernement du Québec. C'est en travaillant ensemble avec les trois organismes publics qu'on va réussir à accélérer la cadence. C'est en travaillant aussi avec d'autres partenariats comme le gouvernement fédéral, comme d'autres provinces, qu'on voit que ça fait une réelle différence. Donc, il faut poursuivre dans ce sens-là. C'est inévitable, c'est nécessaire.
Can you join me in thanking the panel for their great comments? They did a great job. Thank you all very much, and that ends our session. Have a wonderful day.